If you cannot govern your inner world, no amount of power will ever work in your favor. True spiritual authority is not given suddenly. It is earned through growth, discipline, and transformation. If this message is resonating with you, stay connected by subscribing to Motiva and share this with someone who is stepping into a higher level of purpose and maturity. Spiritual authority begins with self-mastery, and without it, true growth cannot occur. Many people seek influence, recognition, or power while neglecting the inner work required to sustain it. Self-mastery is the ability to regulate your thoughts, emotions, impulses, and reactions. It is not suppression, but conscious direction. When you cannot govern your inner world, external authority becomes unstable. Spiritual maturity starts the moment you stop being ruled by fear, ego, anger, or validation, and begin responding from awareness and intention. Self-mastery requires deep honesty. It asks you to observe your patterns without denial and take responsibility for how you show up in the world. Instead of blaming circumstances or people, you recognize that your reactions reveal areas that still need growth. This level of awareness is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Authority cannot rest on instability. If emotions dictate your decisions or insecurity shapes your actions, influence becomes reactive rather than grounded. As self-mastery develops, emotional discipline begins to replace emotional chaos. You learn to pause instead of react, reflect instead of explode, and respond instead of retreat. This does not make you passive, it makes you precise. Your words carry weight because they are intentional. Your presence feels steady because it is not driven by unresolved inner conflict. This steadiness is the foundation of spiritual authority. People naturally trust those who are internally regulated because consistency creates safety. Self-mastery also strengthens discernment. You stop chasing what looks powerful and begin choosing what aligns with purpose. You become less impulsive and more intentional with time, energy, and attention. This discipline protects your direction. Authority matures when you no longer need to prove yourself, compete for relevance, or force outcomes. You move with clarity instead of urgency. Ultimately, self-mastery transforms authority from something you try to exercise into something you naturally embody. Your life becomes ordered from the inside out. Decisions are made from clarity, not emotion. Boundaries are held without guilt. Growth becomes consistent rather than chaotic. This is why self-mastery is the first stage of spiritual maturation. Without it, authority collapses under pressure. With it, influence becomes stable, ethical, and deeply rooted in inner alignment rather than external control. Awareness precedes authority because you cannot lead, influence, or guide what you do not first understand. Spiritual growth deepens the moment you become conscious of your inner world, your patterns, and the unseen forces shaping your behavior. Many people attempt to exercise authority while remaining unaware of their motivations, wounds, or fears. Without awareness, power becomes unconscious and often destructive. True authority begins when you see yourself clearly and accept responsibility for that awareness. Awareness involves observation without judgment. It is the ability to notice your thoughts, emotions, reactions, and triggers without immediately identifying with them. This creates space between impulse and action. In that space, choice becomes possible. Instead of being driven by old habits or emotional reflexes, you gain the ability to respond with intention. Authority grows in this space because control shifts from the external to the internal. You are no longer ruled by circumstances, you are guided by clarity. As awareness deepens, patterns begin to emerge. You start recognizing cycles in your relationships, decisions, and emotional responses. What once felt random now reveals structure. This understanding is empowering because it allows you to interrupt patterns that no longer serve your growth. You stop repeating lessons unconsciously and begin evolving deliberately. Spiritual authority strengthens when you are no longer surprised by your own behavior, but can anticipate and guide it. Awareness also expands compassion. As you understand yourself more deeply, you begin to understand others without judgment. This does not mean tolerating harm or disrespect. It means responding with wisdom People sense when someone sees clearly. Your words land with impact because they are informed, measured, and grounded in understanding rather than emotion. Ultimately, awareness is the gateway to spiritual authority because it transforms unconscious living into intentional growth. It allows you to move through life awake rather than reactive. You become responsible for your inner state, your choices, and your influence. Authority matures naturally when awareness is present because clarity creates stability. Without awareness, power becomes fragile. With awareness, authority becomes sustainable, ethical, and deeply rooted in understanding rather than control. Healing unresolved wounds strengthens authority because unhealed pain silently governs behavior. Many people attempt to grow spiritually while carrying emotional injuries that distort perception, decision-making, and self-worth. These wounds do not disappear on their own. They express themselves through defensiveness, control, avoidance, or the need for validation. When pain remains unaddressed, it competes with wisdom. True authority cannot fully form when old wounds are still directing reactions behind the scenes. Unresolved wounds often originate from experiences of rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or unmet emotional needs. These experiences shape unconscious beliefs about safety, trust, and identity. Without healing, those beliefs influence how you respond to authority, intimacy, and responsibility. You may overcompensate by seeking control or withdraw to avoid vulnerability. Healing begins when you acknowledge the wound without shame and allow yourself to face what has been suppressed. Awareness alone is not enough. Integration and release are required. As healing progresses, emotional reactivity decreases. You no longer interpret present situations through the lens of past pain. This creates emotional stability, which is essential for spiritual authority. Authority rooted in unresolved trauma is unpredictable. Authority rooted in healing is consistent. When you are no longer triggered by familiar patterns, you can respond with clarity instead of defense. This steadiness creates trust, both within yourself and in how others experience you. Healing also restores self-trust. When wounds remain open, you may doubt your judgment or second-guess your intuition. As healing strengthens, confidence becomes grounded rather than performative. You stop seeking approval to feel legitimate and begin standing firmly in your truth. This inner alignment is what gives authority its weight. People feel safe in the presence of someone who is not governed by unhealed pain. Ultimately, healing unresolved wounds is not about erasing the past, but reclaiming power from it. As emotional pain releases its hold, your presence becomes clearer, calmer, and more grounded. Authority matures when actions are no longer driven by fear or compensation, but by wholeness. Healing frees your voice, stabilizes your influence, and allows spiritual authority to operate without distortion. Discipline refines spiritual power, transforming raw potential into consistent authority. Without discipline, insight remains theoretical and growth becomes inconsistent. Many people experience moments of spiritual awareness, clarity, or inspiration, but without structure, those moments fade. Discipline is what anchors growth into daily life. It is the practice of choosing alignment repeatedly, even when motivation fluctuates or conditions are uncomfortable. Authority strengthens not through intensity but through consistency. Discipline creates containment. Spiritual power without containment can become scattered or misdirected. When discipline is present, energy is focused rather than dispersed. You learn to regulate habits, manage time, and prioritize what sustains growth over what offers short-term relief. This refinement allows wisdom to be expressed through action, not just understanding. Authority matures when principles are lived daily, not occasionally acknowledged. Through discipline, resilience develops. You stop relying on emotional states to determine commitment. Whether clarity feels strong or weak, discipline keeps you aligned. This steadiness stabilizes your inner world, allowing you to navigate pressure without losing direction. Spiritual authority requires this stability because influence expands responsibility. Without discipline, increased responsibility can overwhelm rather than empower. Discipline also sharpens integrity. When your actions align with your values consistently, credibility forms naturally. You no longer need to assert authority. It is recognized through coherence between words and behavior. This alignment builds trust, both internally and externally. People sense when someone lives what they believe. Authority grows quietly through reliability rather than force. Ultimately, discipline refines spiritual power by turning awareness into embodiment. It ensures that growth is not dependent on mood, environment, or validation. Through discipline, spiritual maturity becomes sustainable. Power stabilizes, influence deepens. Authority becomes grounded not in intensity or performance, but in a life consistently aligned with purpose and responsibility. Alignment replaces force, and this marks a crucial shift in spiritual maturation. In earlier stages of growth, many people attempt to push outcomes, control situations, or assert influence through effort and intensity. This approach is driven by fear of loss, impatience, or the need to prove worth. While force may produce short-term results, it often creates resistance, exhaustion, and instability. True spiritual authority emerges when alignment takes the place of force, allowing life to respond rather than resist. Alignment begins internally. It occurs when your values, intentions, thoughts, and actions move in the same direction. Instead of fighting against circumstances or people, you learn to move with clarity and purpose. This internal coherence removes the need to manipulate outcomes. When you are aligned, decisions feel calmer, timing feels clearer, and actions feel less strained. Authority rooted in alignment carries a quiet confidence because it is not dependent on pressure or persuasion. As alignment deepens, you become less reactive. You stop chasing validation, outcomes, or recognition. This does not mean disengagement, it means precision. You act when action is required and remain still when waiting is wiser. This discernment protects your energy and sharpens your influence. People sense when someone is acting from alignment rather than force. Your presence feels grounded instead of aggressive, intentional instead of urgent. Alignment also restores trust in timing. Force is often driven by the fear that if you do not push, nothing will happen. Alignment teaches you that not everything needs to be rushed. You begin to recognize when effort is productive and when it becomes interference. This awareness prevents burnout and protects long-term purpose. Authority matures when you can allow processes to unfold without abandoning responsibility or surrendering clarity. Ultimately, alignment replaces force because true power does not need to announce itself. It operates through coherence, patience, and precision. When alignment leads, influence becomes sustainable and ethical. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to make things happen. Instead, you position yourself correctly and allow the right opportunities, connections, and outcomes to meet you naturally. This is the stage where spiritual authority feels effortless, not because there is no effort, but because effort is guided, intentional, and in harmony with purpose rather than driven by fear. Consistency matures authority, turning moments of insight into a stable way of being. Many people experience periods of spiritual clarity, motivation, or growth, but without consistency, these experiences remain temporary. Authority does not develop through occasional breakthroughs. It develops through repeated alignment over time. Consistency is the quiet discipline of showing up for your growth even when enthusiasm fades or progress feels slow. It is what transforms potential into permanence. Consistency builds trust within yourself. When your actions match your intentions repeatedly, self-respect deepens. You begin to rely on yourself, knowing that you will act in alignment regardless of circumstances. This internal trust strengthens authority because it removes hesitation and self-doubt. You no longer question your commitment or direction. Your inner world becomes stable, and stability is essential for sustained influence. As consistency takes root, emotional regulation improves. You are less swayed by external conditions, opinions, or temporary setbacks. Growth becomes less reactive and more grounded. This steadiness allows you to carry responsibility without becoming overwhelmed. Authority matures when you are predictable in character, not in behavior. People feel secure around those whose values and responses remain consistent, even under pressure. Consistency also refines discernment. Repeated alignment sharpens awareness of what supports growth and what distracts from it. You become more sensitive. Authority expands naturally when distractions lose their influence and priorities become clear. You are no longer scattered across competing desires. Your life begins to move in one coherent direction. Ultimately, consistency matures authority by grounding it in reliability rather than intensity. It removes the need for dramatic gestures or constant affirmation. Growth becomes steady, quiet, and sustainable. Authority becomes something you live rather than something you seek. Through consistency, spiritual maturity stabilizes, influence deepens, and your presence carries weight because it is rooted in integrity, endurance, and long-term alignment rather than fleeting moments of inspiration. Responsibility expands influence, and this stage marks the moment spiritual authority moves beyond the self. In earlier stages, growth focuses on inner alignment, healing, and stability. At this level, authority begins to express itself through stewardship. Responsibility is not about burden or control, it is about care. It is the willingness to hold space for others, outcomes, and consequences without abandoning integrity. Influence grows naturally when responsibility is embraced rather than avoided. Taking responsibility means understanding that your choices affect more than just you. Your words carry weight. Your presence sets tone. Your reactions can either create safety or tension. As awareness of this expands, behavior becomes more intentional. You stop acting impulsively because you recognize the ripple effects of your actions. This awareness refines authority, grounding it in wisdom rather than impulse. Influence deepens when people feel considered rather than controlled. Responsibility also requires accountability. At this stage, excuses dissolve. You no longer externalize blame or avoid discomfort. Instead, you evaluate your role honestly and adjust accordingly. This accountability strengthens trust, both internally and externally. People respect those who can admit error without losing composure. Authority grows when humility and strength coexist. As responsibility expands, emotional maturity becomes visible. You can hold complexity without becoming overwhelmed. You listen without needing to dominate. You lead without needing to assert. This balance creates stability in relationships and environments. Others begin to rely on your presence, not because you demand authority, but because your consistency and care create reliability. Ultimately, responsibility expands influence because authority matures into service. It stops being about personal growth alone and becomes about contribution. You recognize that influence is not a privilege to exploit, but a trust to honor. At this stage, spiritual authority becomes relational rather than individual. It is expressed through guidance, support, and stewardship. Influence expands not through force or position, but through responsibility carried with integrity, awareness, and care. Service completes spiritual maturity, bringing authority into its highest and most grounded expression. At this final stage, growth is no longer focused on self-development alone, but on contribution. Authority reaches completion when it is used not to elevate the self, but to uplift others. Service is not self-sacrifice or depletion. It is the natural overflow of alignment, healing, discipline, and responsibility integrated into purpose. When authority is mature, it seeks to serve rather than dominate. Service requires humility, but not insecurity. You no longer need recognition to validate your influence. Your sense of identity is stable, allowing you to give without needing return. This stability makes service sustainable. You understand your limits, protect your energy, and serve from fullness rather than obligation. Authority at this level feels calm, grounded, and expansive because it is rooted in contribution rather than control. At this stage, compassion becomes intentional. You do not attempt to fix everyone or carry what does not belong to you. Instead, you offer presence, wisdom, and guidance where it is appropriate. Service is guided by discernment, not impulse. This prevents burnout and preserves clarity. Authority becomes effective because it respects boundaries while remaining available. People feel empowered rather than dependent in your presence. Service also transforms leadership. Influence becomes less visible yet more impactful. You lead by example, not by instruction alone. Your actions model integrity, patience, and clarity. Others grow not because they are told to, but because your presence invites growth. Authority expressed through service creates environments where people feel seen, supported, and capable. Ultimately, service completes spiritual maturity because it aligns authority with purpose beyond the self. Growth becomes meaningful through contribution. Influence becomes ethical through care. Authority becomes sustainable through humility. At this stage, spiritual authority is no longer something you strive to embody. It is something you live. Service becomes the evidence of maturity, and your life becomes a channel through which wisdom, stability, and clarity quietly move into the world.